imagine you're sitting at a terminal in the Leipzig Halle Airport in Germany. You are nowhere near a war zone.
Right.
You're right in the heart of Central Europe, just waiting for a commercial flight.
Yeah.
And suddenly, the entire logistics and passenger hub is completely shut down.
Wow.
And not because of a snowstorm or a labor strike, but because a military-grade drone carrying explosives just breached the airspace.
It really forces us to ask where a battlefield actually begins and ends today.
It does. Good morning and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this deep dive into current regional and global events. We're stepping back to look at the broader strategic picture, maintaining a calm, professional focus on the facts, just to help you stay thoroughly informed about the world around you.
Exactly.
But before we dive in, we do want to thank our sponsor, ProWave AI. This specific deep dive is actually generated by Stylo News, which is an AI-powered news application.
And to give you some context on that, Stylo News is the consumer version of the Stylo Intel Ops software. That's a platform designed specifically for enterprise operations. I mean, it's what government, military, and business decision makers use to navigate global crises.
So what that means for you, our listener, is that you are getting unique enterprise-grade access to an intelligence tool that's literally designed to support global leaders. Today's mission is to unpack the Stylo News Intel update, specifically the Europe Situation Report for August 11, 2026.
Yes.
We will be analyzing the strategic situation, conflict zones, and key flashpoints across Northern Europe, the Baltic region, Ukraine, and Southern Europe.
And, before we begin mapping out these regions, It is really important to set some clear ground rules for our discussion today.
Right, the neutrality piece.
Exactly. The intelligence briefings we're reviewing cover highly sensitive, often very complex geopolitical conflicts. Because of that, we will maintain strict neutrality throughout this entire deep dive.
We are definitely not here to take sides.
No, nor are we endorsing any specific political or national viewpoints. Our objective is strictly to impartially report the facts on the ground, outline the differing courses of action, and examine the diverse perspectives found in these intelligence briefings.
We just want to provide you with a clear, factual understanding of the geopolitical landscape, completely without generating fear or alarmism.
Precisely. We'll look at the data exactly as it is presented.
Okay, let's unpack this. So let's begin in the north. We're looking at the Baltic region, so specifically Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland.
The immediate frontline borders of NATO.
Right, and if you just follow the news casually, you might assume these countries are bracing for, I don't know, thousands of tanks to suddenly roll across their borders tomorrow. But when we look at the baseline threat assessment in the briefs, the reality is actually quite different, isn't it?
It is entirely different, yeah. The primary takeaway from the intelligence sources is that a deliberate, large-scale conventional attack by Russia is actually highly unlikely in the immediate term.
So no massive ground invasion.
Right. We're talking about an Article 5 scenario. And for those who might need a quick refresher, Article 5 is the cornerstone of the NATO alliance. It's the principle that an attack on one member is an attack on all, which would trigger a unified military response.
Right, the Mutual Defense Pact.
Exactly. The reason a massive D-Day style invasion isn't really in the cards right now comes down to pure logistics. I mean, there are no observable indicators of the massive force concentrations, the supply depots, or, the logistical bridging required to sustain that kind of operation.
Because they're tied up elsewhere.
Yes, Russia is heavily committed in Ukraine, and that limits their capacity to open a completely new conventional military front.
But, just because we aren't seeing massive tank columns doesn't mean the threat is just gone. It just means the tactics have shifted to what the briefings call the hybrid threat.
Precisely.
And this is where that drone at the German airport comes in. It's a shift toward these deniable, below-the-threshold tactics.
What's fascinating here is that we have a very specific warning coming from Lithuanian military intelligence that illustrates exactly how these hybrid tactics work.
Oh, right, the drone signatures.
Yeah, their reporting suggests that Russia may attempt to use captured Ukrainian drones, or, well, at least drones engineered with Ukrainian electronic signatures, to conduct false flag attacks on Baltic critical infrastructure.
That is incredibly complex.
It is. The sources specifically mention high-value targets like the Klaipėda LNG terminal, which handles liquefied natural gas, and the Litpol link.
That's the power grid connection, right?
Right, a crucial cross-border power grid connection between Lithuania and Poland.
Let's break down the mechanics of that for the listener for a second, because the mechanism here is what really matters. If, say, a drone hits a Lithuanian power grid and the serial numbers or the electronic footprint point back to Ukraine, it creates a massive bureaucratic and political headache.
Oh, absolutely.
Because NATO leaders are suddenly forced into a room to debate, was this a rogue Ukrainian unit? Or was it a Russian false flag?
And by the time they figure it out, the physical damage is already done, and the political unity of the alliance has really been tested.
It's all about creating ambiguity so that nobody knows exactly how to legally respond.
That is exactly the strategic logic. I mean, you pressure NATO decision-making and shape political narratives without ever actually crossing the legal threshold into overt war.
Right.
And this pattern of disruption isn't just happening in the Baltics or Germany. It extends much further north into Scandinavia.
Sweden, specifically, right?
Yes. We're seeing reports of Swedish authorities making arrests tied to unauthorized drone flights near their signals intelligence headquarters. That's the FRA in Lövön.
Wow.
As well as flights near the Moscow naval base. So these incidents demonstrate that Northern Europe is just being continuously probed through these low-cost, low-signature means. It's a sustained campaign of surveillance and, really, infrastructure intimidation.
It reminds me of the raptors in the movie Jurassic Park.
Oh, that's an interesting comparison.
Yeah, you know how they systematically test the electric fences? Not because they're launching a full, coordinated attack in that exact moment, but because they are probing for weaknesses.
Right. They're looking for a gap.
Exactly. But to extend that analogy, they aren't just looking for a physical hole in the fence here. They are mapping the system's response time. So if a drone flies over a Swedish naval base, the operators want to see, how many minutes does it take for the local radar to ping?
How fast do the local police arrive?
Right. They are essentially building a database of NATO's nervous system.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. They are mapping the response matrix of Western Europe. Now, to add a layer of complexity to this, there is a piece of uncorroborated single-source intelligence in the briefing mentioning a Russian buildup of 115,000 troops and 8 new divisions near Karelia.
Which borders Finland, right?
Yes.
But wait, if they don't have the logistics for a conventional war right now, like we established earlier, why is that number significant?
Because even if the report is uncorroborated and, requires further verification, the mere possibility forces a reaction.
Ah, I see.
It underscores exactly why NATO frontline states like Latvia and Lithuania are rapidly accelerating their defensive preparations. I mean, they're installing border radars, reinforcing physical barriers, and even preparing bridges for demolition.
Just in case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even if a conventional attack is unlikely, they simply cannot afford the risk of a rapid escalation contingency. They have to remain vigilant.
Which brings us to, I think, the most critical question. If these are all just probes, if they're just testing the fences and mapping the nervous system, what is the actual risk of a miscalculation?
That's the real danger.
Right, like if a drone hits the wrong target or an airport incident causes civilian casualties, how easily does this escalate into a hot war?
Well, to understand the risk of miscalculation, we have to look at the engine driving all of this border testing, which is the ongoing war in Ukraine.
The gravitational pull of all of this.
Exactly. The conflict there dictates the tempo of these hybrid actions across Europe. Currently, the briefs characterize the tactical situation in Ukraine as an attritional stalemate.
I want to pause on the phrase attritional stalemate for a second. Because, when people hear stalemate, they usually picture World War I.
Right. 2 armies stuck in muddy trenches.
Yeah, just not moving an inch for months on end.
Well, in terms of the physical ground borders in places like Pokrovsk or Chasiv Yar, that picture isn't entirely wrong. The ground lines are relatively static. However, the operational depth of the war, so the air and strike reality, is incredibly dynamic and high tempo.
It's happening in the sky.
Yes. According to the briefs, Russia holds the operational initiative in terms of long-range strikes. They are utilizing mixed salvos of ballistic missiles and drones to systematically overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses.
Just sheer volume.
Exactly. The mechanism here is saturation. You fire enough cheap drones to force the enemy to use up their expensive interceptor missiles, and then you follow up with heavy ballistics targeting logistics belts and urban support infrastructure around Kyiv.
Right. But, Ukraine is certainly not just sitting back and playing defense. They have initiated a highly aggressive counter strategy of strategic deep strikes, going far into Russian territory.
They have.
The intelligence highlights targeted drone attacks on the Yaroslavl oil refinery, for instance.
Yeah.
And the goal there is clear. You degrade Russia's war sustainment capabilities by hitting the fuel that runs the tanks.
Taking out the energy infrastructure.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And there was also a significant strike in Nizhny-Kapsk, Russia, which tragically resulted in 13 deaths, including a child, and 75 injuries.
Yes, the humanitarian impact is severe.
It really is. Russian Human Rights Commissioner Yana Lantratova and regional officials have actually had to establish temporary shelters to manage the humanitarian fallout from these strikes. Meanwhile, back on Ukrainian soil, forces are physically fortifying the Chernobyl exclusion zone, actually digging defensive trenches and installing drone nets to prevent any new incursions from the north.
Which is a massive undertaking.
It is. So this is why I have to push back a little bit on the term stalemate. I mean, yes, the ground borders are frozen, but the geographic footprint of the war is undeniably expanding.
That's a very fair
When
point.
you have deep strikes reaching hundreds of miles into Tatarstan and constant attacks on logistics hubs, the war is getting wider, even if the front line isn't moving.
Your observation is spot on. The geographic reach has expanded significantly. And this escalation in strike warfare is occurring alongside a complete freeze in diplomacy.
Nothing is moving at the negotiating table.
Nothing at all. The sources note that Russia has firmly rejected a proposed ceasefire framework. They're maintaining a maximalist diplomatic position, basically insisting that underlying geopolitical issues regarding NATO architecture be addressed before any localized ceasefire can even be discussed.
And it's not just the military and diplomatic fronts that are expanding, it is the economic front too.
Yeah.
If you are wondering how this conflict affects global systems, just look at the recent move by the European Union. The EU just transferred 1.4 billion euros generated from frozen Russian assets directly to Ukraine.
That is a highly consequential financial maneuver.
Can you explain how that actually works?
Absolutely. To explain the mechanics of this, when the conflict began, Western nations froze hundreds of billions of dollars in Russian central bank assets held in European and American financial institutions.
The principal amount.
Right. The EU is now taking the interest generated by those frozen assets and sending it straight to Kyiv. EU High Representative Kaja Kallas strongly advocates for this as a necessary mechanism to support Ukraine's defense, essentially without draining domestic European budgets.
But this has sparked an intense international debate, hasn't it? I mean, seizing the sovereign assets of another nation, even just the interest, crosses a massive red line in international finance.
It absolutely does. It raises complex questions about the trust and stability of the global banking system. Furthermore, social media sentiment analysis within the briefings shows significant public backlash.
People are worried.
They are. Critics argue that moves like this effectively permanently lock in the conflict. It complicates any future diplomatic off-ramps by essentially destroying financial leverage.
It really proves how interconnected global security and economics are. And, that interconnection is actually the perfect bridge to our next geographic zone.
Let's move south.
Yeah, we just talked about how Russia is trying to stretch NATO's resources in the north and east. But there is a second, completely different way that multiple actors are trying to break Europe's cohesion, and it is happening from the bottom up right through the Mediterranean.
Yes, the southern axis of Europe faces very unique vulnerabilities. While the east deals with artillery and drones, the south is dealing with weaponized migration and the spillover from conflicts in the Middle East.
It's a totally different type of strain.
Completely. The sources detail a severe situation affecting Spain and Italy. There have been massive coordinated migrant surges at the Ceuta and Melilla border crossings.
And just for geographic context, these are Spanish enclaves located on the north coast of Morocco. So that means they are the only land borders between the European Union and Africa.
Exactly.
Let's explain how weaponized migration actually works, because it is not just a natural movement of refugees fleeing a crisis. The intelligence dossier, highlighted by Spanish and Italian authorities, suggests this pressure is being actively engineered.
That is correct. The mechanism relies heavily on social media coordination and digital rumor spreading by state or non-state actors.
So it's deliberate.
Very deliberate. You artificially drive thousands of migrants to a specific vulnerable border crossing all at once. And, well, when a sudden influx of 5,000 people hits a small checkpoint, it physically overwhelms the local infrastructure.
Right.
The Spanish government has had to deploy additional forensic and security personnel just to manage the basic humanitarian and identification needs.
And the strategic goal isn't necessarily just to breach the border, it's to spark domestic political paralysis.
Exactly.
I mean, if a local Spanish government is overwhelmed, they demand resources from Madrid. Madrid then has to divert military or financial resources away from other NATO duties. And even more critically, it forces European countries to reconsider the Schengen zone.
That's the real pressure point.
Yeah, for our listeners, the Schengen zone is the area of Europe where citizens can normally travel across borders without passports or checks. It's really a core pillar of everyday European life and commerce.
It is.
So when countries get nervous about migration and start throwing up border checks again, they are fundamentally breaking that cohesion.
Exactly. It tests border security, exacerbates domestic political polarization, and severely strains the economic ties between EU nations. And this instability in the South isn't just coming from North Africa, it's tied directly to the broader Middle East.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
The intelligence notes that Italy has recently deployed 700 troops to the Gulf.
Right?
Wait, 700 Italian troops to the Gulf. That is thousands of miles away from Europe.
Yeah.
If Italy is dealing with a crisis on its own shores, why are they pulling military resources away from their own backyard to send to the Middle East?
Because from their perspective, it is a matter of pure economic survival. The Middle East conflict directly threatens Southern Europe's commercial lifelines.
The shipping lanes.
Yes. The intelligence briefs cite ongoing Houthi attacks on commercial shipping near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. That's the critical choke point at the southern end of the Red Sea. And they also note a specific vessel being targeted in the Strait of Hormuz.
To put that in perspective for you, the listener, if you are a factory worker in Milan or, a logistics manager in Madrid, a missile fired in the Red Sea actually matters to you directly.
It absolutely does.
If commercial vessels cannot safely transit those waterways, they have to sail all the way around Africa. That delays shipments by weeks, it spikes insurance premiums, and it drives up the cost of energy and basic goods at Mediterranean ports.
Precisely. The conflicts in Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria act as massive threat multipliers. They increase the risk of maritime disruption, which drives inflation in Europe, and they create the conditions for further refugee outflows and radicalization that easily spill over into the Mediterranean basin.
It's all connected.
It really is. Furthermore, the briefs note a significant shift in the regional security architecture surrounding Europe. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan have newly formalized a trilateral defense pact.
Wow, that is a massive diplomatic development. I mean, Saudi Arabia is a major energy power. Turkey is a vital NATO member guarding the Black Sea, and Pakistan is a nuclear-armed state.
It is huge. The agreement essentially declares that an attack on one is an attack on all. This significantly alters the diplomatic and military balance in a region that directly borders Europe's southern flank.
It's a totally new dynamic.
It creates a new power block that European and American decision-makers must now navigate when planning their Mediterranean and Middle Eastern strategies.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've mapped out the deniable gray zone in the north, the attritional deep strikes in the east, and the weaponized migration and maritime pressures in the south.
Yes.
Now, let's synthesize this data. When we look at the key decision makers driving these events, what are their perspectives? How do they view the board?
Well, the intelligence provides a very clear, factual view of the strategic calculus of several key leaders. For instance, Russian President Vladimir Putin reportedly views NATO as currently weakened.
Oh, really?
Yes, the briefs suggest he attributes this partly to political divisions within the United States. They specifically note the skeptical stance of figures like former U.S. President Donald Trump regarding rapid arms deliveries to Ukraine.
Right.
Because Putin perceives this hesitation, his chosen course of action is to favor testing NATO thresholds with the low-level hybrid operations we discussed earlier, like in the Baltics and Germany.
And what about Turkey? Because President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is in a very unique position, right? He's balancing his new defense pact in the Middle East with his NATO obligations.
Erdogan is indeed performing a very complex balancing act. The reports indicate he is heavily emphasizing Turkey's vital military contributions to NATO, such as hosting regional summits and taking command roles in the Black Sea.
Keeping his options open.
Exactly. He is doing this while simultaneously trying to manage constrained domestic economic options and maintain working relations with Russia.
What about the EU leaders?
Meanwhile, within the European Union, leaders like High Representative Kaja Kallas are pushing hard for expanded economic sanctions targeting Russia's military-industrial complex.
Okay.
However, she faces significant internal EU friction and real domestic political challenges over the economic costs those policies impose on regular European citizens.
Which leads perfectly into the public perspective. We know what the leaders want. But what is the social media sentiment telling us about how everyday populations are reacting to all these policies?
The sentiment analysis across platforms like X reveals a highly polarized public. We're seeing very distinct spheres of influence.
How so?
Well, Western-leaning outlets and their audiences generally push for sustained military and financial support for Ukraine. Conversely, Russian sources and their audiences strongly defend Moscow's actions and heavily criticize NATO expansion. But the most actionable piece of intelligence regarding public sentiment is the broad frustration across European demographics directed toward EU leadership.
Frustration over the economic impacts we discussed earlier.
Yes, primarily. Citizens are expressing deep anxiety and anger over the handling of migration crises, the economic pain of energy shocks caused by maritime disruptions, and, the reimposition of internal borders within the Schengen zone.
It's hitting their wallets and their daily routines.
Precisely. The briefs note that this frustration is fueling fears of broader civil unrest, and it's actively contributing to right-wing political shifts ahead of national elections in countries like Spain and Italy. People are really feeling the geopolitical strain in their daily lives.
So based on all of this data, what are the most likely events listeners should watch for in the coming weeks?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the intelligence gives us a clear forecast. As we established, do not expect massive conventional invasions across European borders.
Right.
Instead, you need to watch for a continuation of the small bites strategy.
Small bites.
Yes. This means sustained drone harassment near military bases to map response times. It means widespread GPS jamming affecting commercial aviation. It means cyber attacks targeting rail networks and logistics scheduling, and very aggressive information warfare.
Just constant pressure.
Exactly. These actions are precisely calibrated to create ambiguity, delay attribution, and exhaust NATO's resources mentally and financially, all without providing a clear justification for a unified military response.
It's a strategy of exhaustion. So what does this all mean? It means the very definition of a front line has fundamentally changed. A front line is no longer just a trench in a field or a line drawn on a map.
Not anymore.
Today, the front line is a logistics airport in Germany. It's a natural gas pipeline in Lithuania, an undersea communications cable in the Arctic, and a border fence in Spain. The battlefield is quite literally everywhere that modern infrastructure exists.
That is exactly right.
We want to thank you for joining us today for this deep dive into the August 11th, 2026 intelligence briefing. It's a complex world, but understanding the mechanisms behind the headlines is the best way to navigate it.
Absolutely.
A quick reminder about Stylo News, the platform that actually generated this analysis. Stylo News is a mobile and computer application that individuals can download to customize their own personal intelligence-style briefs.
It's a fantastic tool.
It really is. It aggregates data from hundreds of traditional news sources, as well as real-time social media platforms like X, delivering enterprise-grade analysis right to your device. We highly encourage you to subscribe for AI-powered news on demand by visiting www.stylonews.com.
Highly recommend it.
We also invite you to reach out and request topics for future deep dives. What global events or regional flashpoints do you want us to unpack next? Be sure to follow Stylo News on your favorite social media platform so you never miss an update.
And I will leave you with this final thought to consider as you go about your day. If modern warfare is increasingly fought in this ambiguous gray zone, relying on deniable drone strikes, cyber attacks on civilian infrastructure, and the weaponization of human migration, how does a traditional military alliance like NATO define an attack in the 21st century?
Tough question.
It is. If a cyber attack taking down a regional power grid or a false flag drone hitting a commercial pipeline doesn't legally trigger an Article 5 military response, what does modern deterrence actually look like moving forward? Thank you for listening.